I'm certainly not alone in appreciating the relationship between music and architecture. Architecture is not just an intellectual or abstract exercise. It is an emotional experience just as music is. When you leave a building, it is like leaving a piece of music. It is still in you and still with you. The words of Daniel Libeskind there. Tonight, I'll be discussing my engagement with the creation of site-specific compositions. That is, compositions that have been informed by a particular building and then performed in that space. But I'd like to start off by providing a little bit of a background about my compositional research. A picture is worth 1,000 words, a very famous idiom, which for me is absolutely true. I'm a very visual composer. During the third year of my undergraduate studies, my hearing started to deteriorate, and I've been wearing hearing aids since my early 20s. As my hearing has become impaired, so my sense of sight has heightened, and my reliance on visual cues has made me a really visual person. My friends joke that I'd make a great witness at a crime scene. I'm rubbish with names, but I'm really good with faces, outfits, car license plates. I don't even own a car. I had a bit of a compositional crisis at the start of my PhD, writer's block. And one day I was out shopping for a present for a friend's daughter, and I came across a kaleidoscope, which I ended up buying for myself. And then I wrote a short chamber work based around the idea of a kaleidoscope, so different patterns, different musical textures merging in and out of each other. And this was really a light bulb moment, and since then, most of my work has been informed by some kind of visual stimuli. I've written pieces informed by sculpture. I discovered Fred Sandbach at an exhibition at the Fruit Market Gallery in Edinburgh. And these sculptures really spoke to me as though they were actually instruments themselves. I remember being in the gallery and kind of having to hold myself back. I almost kind of wanted to touch and pluck these strings. And I wrote a piece for solo cello inspired by these sculptures. I've also written 2 works inspired by different photographic techniques by Stephen Lawson. So I've worked with one of his panoramic collages in which he selects a particular area and then moves the camera incrementally in a cycle from left to right, capturing a day at a time or the changing seasons as we have here. I've also responded to this very different technique where a very long exposure creates a striking contrast to the panoramic collages. During my PhD, I was very fortunate to receive funding to undertake several research trips to New York, resulting in an orchestral work inspired by the Chrysler Building. A very famous skyscraper. I was allowed access to take recordings and photographs inside the building. The photograph on the right here, I am pretty much hanging out of the 63rd floor window trying to capture this famous eagle gargoyle. I overcame post 9/11 security and was allowed to set off a pulse of white noise in the lobby of the building, which I recorded. As white noise contains all possible pitches, when you record its reverberation, you capture the principal pitch resonances of the space. So I then analysed this recording and worked with the most prominent pitches, those that sounded the loudest and the longest, and I used them to inform various harmonic and melodic ideas within the piece. I also compiled a series of photographs of the building, a series of reflections in which I captured the building kind of distorted in the exterior of a nearby building, and I translated these profiles and surfaces and used them to determine melodic lines and textures. But although I took inspiration from the building, this piece was not written for performance in the building. So in 2014, I wrote my first site-specific composition, for a building in Chicago. I'm a member of Access Contemporary Music, which is a Chicago-based organization that provide opportunities for composers to present their work and to take part in interesting collaborations. So they had teamed up with Open House Chicago, which is a 2-day festival in which buildings that wouldn't typically be open to the public or might charge an admission open their doors for free. ACM were looking for 3 composers to write a piece of music inspired by a particular building. The piece would then be presented in the space as the public walk around and visit the building as part of Open House. My proposal was accepted, and I wrote a new work for violin and cello informed by this building and presented in this building. Madlener House was built in 1902, initially as a family home. Since the 1960s, it's been home to an arts organisation. The design here is what's known as a prairie style of architecture, and the address of this was West Burton Place, so it felt like fate that I was drawn to this building. I'd never actually been to the building before, so I just had to look at lots of photographs that I could find online, and then I drew out certain features that I wanted to focus on. And it kind of became almost a musical walk through the building. So various features that informed the musical textures included the detail in the limestone and wood at the entrance, really, really beautiful mahogany and walnut on the ground floor, the intricate staircase, and the geometric, colourful patterns in the stained glass window. I flew out for the event and said a few words before each performance. The piece is about 6 minutes and was played at roughly 15-minute intervals over a 3-hour period. So this was not a formal sit-down concert. Everyone was very respectful of the music and the performers, but the idea is that you're welcome to take a seat or to walk around the space. I personally love this. I can get really claustrophobic in confined spaces, so the idea that you don't have to stay in one seat for the duration, that you can wander around, is really attractive to me, and I think to many people actually. I really enjoyed this experience, despite on the day being in a lot of pain, having been in A&E the day before, but that's a different story. But I didn't necessarily think about how the music could help people to connect with the space. It's such a beautiful building that I don't think anybody necessarily needed a musical accompaniment to help them appreciate this. Certainly many people seemed to enjoy the music, and I got lovely feedback. But it wasn't until I worked with Open House Chicago the following year that I began to consider how a specially composed work might enhance the visitor experience and perhaps encourage people to engage with the architecture if at first they find it's not to their liking. So in 2015, I was so honoured to be invited to write for a Mies van der Rohe building. If his name is unfamiliar to you, you might be looking at this building and wondering why I'm so excited by this. Mies van der Rohe is an incredibly famous and respected modernist architect. He passed away in 1969, but his buildings remain hugely significant today. In fairness, this is not one of his most impressive buildings. Here we have Farnsworth House and the Barcelona Pavilion, which are probably two of his most famous structures. He designed the Barcelona chair here for the pavilion. You may recognize that in itself. It's become a really iconic piece of furniture. I've been lucky enough to visit both of these structures, and I really admire Mies's architectural designs, but also his skill as a craftsman, which is revealed in his exemplary understanding of materials. And from previous experience of Mies's work, I feel that a visit to one of his buildings demands time and space in order to really appreciate the beauty and quality of the materials. So I headed off to Chicago to be in the chapel on the day, and I'm so glad I was there. This was such a magical day. If you're interested, you'll find a video of this performance online. You can just search my name, Carr Chapel, Vimeo. I don't have time to play an extract this evening. The work that I wrote for solo cello really embodies Misa's aesthetic, less is more. So I tried to establish a powerful yet contemplative atmosphere, one which creates space and invites the listener to focus on individual musical tones and their properties. In this chapel, or really any building by Mies, if we take the time to really consider the materials, so here the travertine marble altar, the terrazzo floor, the simple steel cross, if we inspect these materials up close, we're rewarded with their really inherent beauty and elegance. And I tried to create something similar with the musical textures, a single sustained note on the cello that explores different speeds of vibrato, a long glissando just formed from harmonics, simple stripped back textures, but when we have the time to focus on the color and the timbre, we really appreciate the inherent beauty of the cellist creating these very simple sound worlds. And the public got it. They just got what I was trying to achieve. They could really hear the connection between the musical textures and the architecture. And the piece went down incredibly well. And this was, without doubt, one of the best experiences of my life. It genuinely seemed as though my music encouraged people to stay longer in the space. Many people stayed to hear the piece twice. For some, it made them reevaluate their initial perception of the building. It invited them to spend longer thinking about the building and appreciating the materials used. And almost everyone that visited the building that day approached me and wanted to talk to me about my music. And as much as I love Chicago and these were fabulous experiences, I wonder if I could achieve something similar, but a little closer to home. So I took the idea to the Coburn Association, the organisers of Edinburgh Doors Open Day, which is our equivalent of Open House Chicago. Once they knew I wasn't looking for any money or much kind of time on their behalf, they were really up for the idea. I selected a building to write for and invited 2 colleagues at Napier to compose for a space also. And we all wrote for BMOS students who performed the new works on the day. So you can see here the building that I selected, my colleagues Ken and John selected. And at this point, I'd like to invite Joanna Stark to come up and join me. Many of you will know Joanna. She's principal study cellist in 3rd year of the BMOS. And I wrote my piece for Doors Open Day for Joanna. And she's kindly made herself available this evening to present short extracts from my composition. So this is the beautiful, I find it beautiful, Le Corbusier-inspired church that I selected to work with. A stunning 1966 building by Kinnemouth. Now it's an A-listed building. A lot of people in Edinburgh were not aware of this building's existence. It's situated in Christorphin, near Glasgow Road on the way out to the airport. I was really drawn to the simple design, but it's very bold. I was struck by the lines and the angles and the curves. It was a really beautiful day when I first visited the church, and I think that this quotation by another famous architect just works perfectly with this particular building. The piece that I composed is about 7 minutes long and draws inspiration from both the exterior and interior design. And rather than present the piece in full, I'd like to talk you through the 5 main sections, and Joanna will play a short extract from each. So here on the left, the angle captured here is very bold. We have a solid straight line set behind an angular line, and this is the main entrance leading up to the bell tower. I translated this in musical terms as a single solid low pitch to which a very, very slow glissando is added, and this is how the work opens. With the bell tower on the right, we have lines and curves, which is a really common feature within the building. And I was particularly attracted to the two beams at the top and their contrasting curved shadows. So for this, I've retained the idea of glissando, but I invited Joanna to freely determine the exact range and speed of these glissando, which are played over a sustained drone. And the indeterminate element here acknowledges that the curved shadows of these two lines aren't fixed. The light impacts on their intensity and their depth. So in a moment, I'll ask Joanna to play the opening double stop glissando, where she is holding down, playing the bottom C string, and over this playing a very long glissando. And this then leads into the shorter, freer gestures, which are performed differently on every occasion. I hadn't initially intended to make a reference to the church bell. I thought this would be too obvious, too literal. However, on one of the visits to the church, they were very happy to sound the bell for me, and I thought, oh, this is a really, really beautiful bell. So rather than try to replicate the exact pitch and resonance, I added what I hope is a more subtle reference, which reflects the interesting sound which has a high and also a low quality. So here Joanna is going to pluck the open C string, the bottom string of the instrument, before almost immediately capturing a higher bowed harmonic. So I've tried to capture the high and low sonorities in a less obvious manner. Here we have an aerial perspective of the building in which the square sanctuary is held in supporting hands. And these hands are the two entrances to the building. It's a really beautiful touch on behalf of the architect. So as you enter the building, you're walking into a hand, the hand which the church describe as welcoming and embracing you. So I really wanted to acknowledge this feature. And in a moment, as Joanna introduces the next extract, she'll present a note in the lower register, which with increasing intensity of vibrato is one of the richest and warmest moments of the work. And this is the hand welcoming you inside. And then, having entered the building, we're now faced with the interior, which is no less impressive than the exterior design. I just don't think the photographs really do it justice. In keeping with the exterior, there's much use of white. Even the organ, which you can see just peeking out behind the wall at the back, even the organ is white. And again, we've got lots of straight lines and curves. You can see these big curved columns around the sanctuary. Simple green carpet and really, I like my concrete, a really beautiful concrete floor between the pews. And whenever I stand in this space, I'm constantly struck by this juxtaposition of the open, ethereal quality. The ceiling seems as though it's floating, and yet there's a boldness in the use of concrete and sharp lines and columns. And so I wanted to represent this feeling, for me at least, of, oh, it's so bold and it's so dramatic. Oh, it feels like it's floating. Oh, that concrete is so powerful. Oh, that natural light is so uplifting. So the next extract opens with a really warm tone, and this is the entrance, the hand welcoming you inside. And then we'll hear some double stopping, which is 2 strings played at once. So we'll have some open strings and harmonics, moving to a tremolando between 2 harmonics and the open strings. So I was really trying to depict this juxtaposition between the bold, powerful design, and that's the open strings that give us a full sound, and the light floating quality, and that's the thinner harmonic tones. And I wanted to present them in a manner that allows them to coexist. The building is particularly beautiful on a bright day, and to me the white exterior acts as sort of a white canvas on which other shapes and forms take life. I love my modernist architecture, what some people might consider quite harsh, brutalist architecture, but I also love nature and have a particular affinity with trees. Some people here will know that that is my nickname. When I started university, Katrina seemed too hard for my mates, so Katrina gradually became Katrine, and then Treen, and then Tree. But to students, I'm still Katrina. So I love trees, and I love this photo where the leaves and branches of the neighbouring trees kind of look as though they're dancing on the side of the building. So in the next extract, Joanna will sustain the open G string, above which we're going to hear intermittent flourishes and short gestures on the next string. And very simply, the sustained string, the drone, is the building. This is fixed and permanent. And the short intermittent flourishes are the shadows, which are inherently weaker than the structure and dependent on the light as to whether they exist or not. The original design included a shallow moat that you can see on the right here, which was at the corner of the main entrance. Unfortunately, waterproofing was not as strong as the design, and it proved to be a little bit too problematic, so the moat was drained a number of years ago. While this feature is no longer in use, it was an important element of the original design, and so I wanted to make a reference to it. So in the final section now, we're going to hear little fluctuations around a central pitch through trills, various speeds of vibrato, in essence, just quite subtle, simple allusions to water. And I love the simplicity of this building. So the piece then finishes with a single light harmonic, but that felt too bare. So in acknowledgement of the contrast between the bold design and the open, ethereal quality inside, as Joanna finishes on this final harmonic, she's going to lightly touch the open D string, which again is a more full, purer sound. So again, finishing with this juxtaposition between light and dark and bold and floating. I thoroughly enjoyed writing this piece for Joanna, and would like to thank her for her enthusiasm and engagement with the whole project and for being so generous with her time this evening, and I'm sure you'll join me in thanking her for playing so beautifully tonight. Now, as if composing a new work for my student to play in this beautiful space wasn't exciting enough for me, I had some colleagues from Napier join me at the church on the day. Over a drink or two, I discovered last year that Sam and Kathy from our design subject group share my interest in modernist architecture. This is some of Kathy's jewellery here. Sam is also a jewellery designer. Both Sam and Kathy are really interested in 3D printing. Sam worked a few years ago with Stirling Castle, creating in situ 3D printed souvenirs based on imagery within the castle. I've never actually been to Stirling Castle. I think there's some kind of famous unicorn tapestry or something like that. Anyway, the unicorn is an important feature of the castle. And the response to this was really positive. Visitors appreciated watching their souvenir being made in the castle. This wasn't bought in the gift shop, it wasn't mass-produced in a factory. It enhanced the visitor experience and created more of a personal connection to the souvenir. Kathy is a 3D printing genius, and especially for Doors Open Day, she made a beautiful little model of Craigsbank Church, which was a little memento for people to take away on the day. This is a unique model. You can't find anything like this in the shops. The model takes about an hour to print, so we had a limited edition to give away to members of the public on the day. They went very quickly indeed. But we also had a printer in the church so that people could actually see the process in action. And this is a little video that the church made on the day. I really wanted to gather a response from the public regarding our activities, so I created a short questionnaire to gauge their response. I'll just let you take a moment, it's my only text-based slide really, to read through the comments that we got. So it's clear that our activities enhanced the visitor experience. We made the event more engaging and memorable. Several people said that they'd love to attend more events of this nature. And from chatting to people on the day, it became clear to me that this type of event is also a great way to introduce music to people who might not actively seek out live concerts, or particularly of contemporary music. By committing to Edinburgh Doors Open Day, I turned down a very attractive paid commission to write for Doors Open Milwaukee. It was the same weekend, and I didn't want to accept the commission and write for a space if I couldn't actually be there to mingle with the public. So at Craigsbank on the day, I got chatting to some people, and I told them about this. And they said, "We're so glad that you didn't accept that and that you're here today to talk to us about your piece." And that was a really, really lovely piece of feedback. And it made me appreciate that by being there and just saying a few words about the piece, that the event was more personable and more memorable. The church themselves were delighted with the footfall on the day, which was a significant increase to their previous Doors Open Day experience. So what's next? As a direct response to our activities at Doors Open Day, which has raised awareness of Craigsbank Church, the next meeting of the Church of Scotland's Church, Art and Architecture Committee is going to be held at Craigsbank. And I've been invited to come along and present a talk about my engagement with music and space, and I'm delighted that Joanna's able to join me there also, and she'll have a chance to play the piece again in the space. This is the next building that Sam, Kathy and I have our eye on, a 1965 church in Prestonpans. We're planning a similar public engagement event here, hopefully introducing this modernist gem to a wider audience, and just raising awareness of these structures, which are often unloved and not overly appreciated. And we've been talking about how we might combine our research further. So on the bottom here, you can see another one of Kathy's models. This is Robin Hood Gardens in London, not yet quite loved brutalist building. But I'm showing you this to highlight that these 3D models can in effect be designed as little Lego models, buildings that you put together yourself. So with this in mind, we're in the process of working on a prototype for a musical model of St. Gabriel's, a model that you assemble. So as you're building the model and different pieces interact with each other, you'll be able to hear recordings of my music composed in response to different features of the architectural design and different sections of the building. It's quite early days yet. We haven't built a prototype because I haven't composed the music. But the music could be transmitted through internal speakers, installing a little chip in each piece of the model, or connecting the model to a phone by Wi-Fi or an app. What we're hoping to do is to create a prototype for a public engagement event at St. Gabriel's, and that will give us an opportunity to gather feedback on our idea. So it's certainly an exciting way for us to explore how the memory of one of our events can be preserved and live on in a little musical model souvenir. Thank you very much for your time this evening, and if we have time, I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Okay. Do you have any questions for Katrina? Oh, well.
I'll take that.
Okay, so do we have any questions?
I was just going to ask, because you've focused on modernist buildings there, it quite interests me. What would you do for, say, a very grandiose sort of cathedral, say, you know, like Florence or something, the dome, what would you do for that?
That's a really simple answer. I wouldn't want to work with it. I only work with buildings that I'm really attracted to, that I'm really drawn to, and I just love my modernist architecture. I wouldn't want to write for a space that I felt I couldn't do it justice in terms of, you know, my writing.
When creating a composition for any of your like architecture, you normally filled with a vast amount of ideas, and then have you came to a point where you were halfway through one and just kind of scrapped it in a way, or just kind of
With any of these particular projects? Not really, no. I kind of come up with just in words, what are the main features of the building that speak to me, and what is it that I want to capture? What do I want the public to get from the music? And then kind of take it from there. With lots of other pieces, there are things that I scrap and then revise. But I compose quite quickly once I know exactly what I'm doing. So I probably spend longer with these types of pieces, really planning what I want to do. And then once I have that, so the Craigsbank piece I probably wrote in 2 days.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Say your tastes in art and architecture and music line up in any way that influences the way you work or what you choose to write about?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Your taste in like art, say music and or like painted art and architecture, do they line up as far as you like modernism? Is there anything similar that you like in contemporary music?
Yes, I mean, I love all contemporary arts. So when I was an undergrad student in my second year, I discovered John Cage, and I love John Cage. He's my favorite person ever, but it's not just for his music. It was because Cage embraced all different art forms. So it was through him that I discovered modern choreography, modern literature, modern art, and so on. And it's not to say that I don't appreciate earlier traditions, not that at all, but I just get most excited when I'm working with something modern.
If you imagine when you're composing, do you imagine how the piece will sound acoustically in the space? Is that does that take up a big part of your brain when you're trying to think it through, or is it just all visual, rather than trying to getting into the acoustic nature?
An interesting question, and it seems an obvious question for a musician, but because I have such a severe hearing loss, my appreciation of acoustics is so very flawed now. So in Chicago, a lot of people asked me that, did you know how this was going to sound? And I said, no, I've never been to this building before. And in Craigsbank, that was the first time I'd actually visited the building before writing the piece. And I have enough hearing left to determine this is a nice acoustic. But I don't worry too much about how it will sound, because I know that how I hear it is different to how everybody else hears it anyway. But it's a very interesting question, and I'm sure that there are many other composers who work in this medium that would definitely take that into account.
That's very interesting.
I'm just interested, how did you find Craigsbank? And how did you, were you aware of it before? I've probably walked past that place about 100 times, I've never noticed it.
So many people said the exact same thing. What I did was, when I approached Edinburgh's Doors Open Day, I thought, okay, I should think about a building I'd like to work with. So I just looked at the brochure from the previous year, looked this building up and thought, yep, I can work with that. And that was it, really. But a lot of my friends who came along on the day like the modernist architecture and live in Edinburgh and still weren't aware of this building.
Yeah, I grew up the west side of Edinburgh, and I'm literally...
It's nestled away at a little suburban area. But I hope you'll visit it now.
That's great. Thank you very much, Katrina.
Thank you.